Hi, welcome to today's Slice of Life segment. I'm Sandra Ton, and I facilitate the memoir writing for seniors program through the Powell River Public Library. Today's reading, short local memoir, is from the ebook, the electronic book published by the library called Taboo. The author is Audrey Lyster. Audrey spent the first 10 years of her working life in England as a chiropodist. After her parents died, she immigrated to Canada, where she met Jerry Lyster, a national park warden. This opened up a whole life of adventure, including wilderness, marriage, and children. A talented writer, Audrey did not start writing until she was in her 80s, when she joined the memoir writing program at the library. So Audrey's story that was published in Taboo in 2016 is titled Fresh and Illegal. In the spring of 1960, the first year of my marriage to Jerry, a park warden in Banff National Park, my sister wrote from England announcing that she and her daughter would be coming for a visit. My niece was 10 years old, which meant it was the last year she could fly for half fare, a significant saving. I, with my harmonious nature, could not argue against the visit, despite the fact that it was less than ideal in many ways. My new husband and I had moved out to the summer cabin, which offered primitive accommodation, and in addition, if we followed the park rules, our diet was limited to canned meats, soups, and little in the way of fresh food. It didn't help that my catering powers had not developed fully, and that the nearest grocery store trip, which was allowed only once a month, was more than 25 kilometers away, accessible by horseback. Jerry was convinced that we needed a supply of fresh meat for our visitors, and, of course, the hills were alive with the sound of fresh meat bugling away in the shape of elk. To kill one, however, would be considered poaching, the very act that a warden was expected to prevent. Despite that, the powers that be appeared somewhat ambiguous. One of them even gave Jerry a book of recipes for cooking wild meat. We were very aware of the presence of a herd of elk in a draw just behind the cabin. One afternoon, not long before our guests were scheduled to arrive, and after much soul-searching, Jerry appeared, gun in hand and raised above his head, and said, "If you hear this go off, we will have meat." This was a moment of high drama, which every early homesteader's wife would recognize. I must admit I was a little nervous. Well, actually, I was a lot nervous. Though the day was almost over and the valley was totally devoid of people, I still felt that the superintendent could easily be lurking behind the nearest bush, ready to jump out and catch us in the act, red-handed. Jerry hadn't been gone long when I did hear a shot, and then a sound like barking from several different areas behind the cabin. I immediately thought he had wounded a critter, which was then running to collapse at the feet of the park superintendent. Not so, I found out soon enough. The barking was coming from the mother of the young elk that Jerry had shot. This didn't make me feel any better. The deeper we sank into this illegal act, the more uncomfortable I became. But I had to go on, halfway back up the mountain with Jerry to help him butcher the animal. By this time, it was getting dusk and harder to see. Plus, our nervousness didn't help. After puncturing a couple of its internal organs, we did manage to get the animal into quantities. After burning the incriminating evidence, we were ready to head back to the cabin, but not before agreeing on a plan of action. I would go on ahead, and when I heard Jerry approaching, I would call out some prepared idiotic remark indicating that the coast was clear. Of course, when I got back to the cabin, it was just as deserted as expected, as anyone with brains was home eating supper by now. In our discussions, before we started all this stupidity, I admitted knowing how to preserve wild meat. I had the jars, and in the morning I would cut off the meat from the front quarters and cook it for the requisite 4 to 5 hours. I was up early, prepared the meat for canning, and had it bubbling away before 8 a.m. Of course, it was the hottest day of summer so far. The cabin walls were pulsating with heat as I was keeping the door closed to hide my crime. On the 8 a.m. local radio news, it was reported that there had been a fire in Lake Louise. The post office and the adjoining store, owned by outfitter Ray Lagasse, who was currently out with a party of campers in the neighborhood of our cabin. Someone would have to inform Ray of the damage to his store. As a result, our usually quiet, deserted valley would soon be running. There was nothing I could do but keep the cabin door closed and hope. At about 11 a.m., a young man arrived on horseback looking for Ray. I made tea, which I served outside, opening the door just a crack to allow myself to slide through and hoping the aroma of wild meat cooking was unfamiliar to our guest. He didn't seem surprised by this rather unusual treatment of not being invited in, and left soon after in pursuit of Ray. A couple of hours later, Ray himself showed up on his way back to Lake Louise. He received the same outdoor tea treatment and left soon after. For the next few days, we packed the 2 hindquarters of elk with us wherever we went, like millstones around our necks, because we were so afraid to leave them behind where someone might see them. Then it came time to go to Calgary and pick up our visiting relatives. After much hassle with lost luggage and so forth, we finally sat down to our first meal with our guests at the summer cabin. When presented with our bountiful offering of wild elk, my sister announced that she didn't eat meat. She was a vegetarian. That's Fresh and Illegal by Audrey Lyster, published in 2016 in the ebook Taboo. Thanks for listening today.